Live from Washington, it's the Inside Scoop, with all the news the government does not want you to know. Now here's the host of the Inside Scoop, Congressional Attorney Mark Levine.
Good evening, America. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. Have you done your taxes yet? If not, you better hurry up or get an extension. It is tax time again, that time when all of us Americans pull out the pen and paper and those crazy tax forms and try to make sense of the IRS publications, try to figure out how much we owe the government. Of course, income taxes are not the only taxes we pay, although it's the kind we most think about on April 15th. There are Social Security taxes and estate taxes and sales taxes and local and state taxes and probably 1,000 other taxes that I haven't mentioned. How much taxes should we be paying? What is a fair tax? What is an unfair tax? Who should bear the burden of our nation's taxes? And should we pay for things that we spend, or should we go deep into debt? To answer, or to help answer some of these questions, I've invited as a guest the Director of Government Affairs for the National Taxpayers Union, Kristina Rasmussen. Kristina, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Thanks for having me on.
Now let's start with that complexity issue, because I think as it comes around April 15th, I myself, by the way, was tearing my hair out. I won't go into the specific details. It was a question of a refund of a state tax I paid in a prior year. I went to 1 million IRS publications. Frankly, I couldn't figure it out, and finally I just decided to let the TurboTax program do it. I hope they get it right. You just did a study on tax complexity.
Yes.
Your organization. Tell me about that.
It is horribly complex for both individuals and corporate taxpayers. If you're the average taxpayer filling out a 1040 form, you will spend over 26 hours filling out that form this year. You will have average costs of over $200 out of pocket to pay to file your taxes. In an aggregate total, we're looking at 3.5 billion hours Americans will spend filling out their taxes. The value of that time is over $92 billion. They will have $27 billion of out-of-pocket costs. It is incredibly difficult to file your taxes.
So the NTU supports a simplified tax system. Does that mean that you're willing to give up on certain tax breaks that make our tax system more complicated? If you have a windfall on some sort of corporate profit and the oil companies get so much, if you have so much, you'd be willing to get rid of all those kinds of credits and things?
Absolutely. In fact, we support one plan that's called the Fair Tax. It's a national retail sales tax of about 23%. That would get rid of a lot of these common deductions that are popular, but we argue that the simplicity of one simple tax rate for everybody would be worth it.
Well, let me argue with you here, because there's a big difference, I think, between abandoning progressive tax rates and making for simple taxes. It isn't that complex to say that if you earn a certain amount, you pay 15%, another amount 20%, another amount 28%. That's not what costs Americans $200. That's not what costs them 24 hours making that one mathematical calculation. What costs them is, well, you get a tax credit for the telephone excise tax, and you get a certain deduction for health care, and frankly, those are easy compared to all the business taxes where you have to figure out restaurant bills and so forth. I mean, let's face it, the progressive taxation, that's not what's so complex. It's the other things, right?
Well, a lot of the complexity in the system are for various tax credits at the individual and the corporate level. But you have to realize that for every tax credit you give to your favorite group, teachers, families, the rate for everybody needs to rise to make up for all of these credits. So while we do support furthering existing tax credits that are in place right now, we would prefer in a more ideal world to see one low rate for everybody, or if you prefer a progressive system of simple graduated rates with very limited deductions, but a lower overall rate.
You mentioned families. One of the most famous tax exemptions is the one you get for each child. What that means, of course, is that people without children, single people and married people without children, actually pay higher rates than people with children. What's NTU's position on the classic tax exemption?
Well, I think that if our legislators want to support a pro-family policy where they encourage people via the tax code to have children, that's their choice to make. I want to add, though, that it's funny, over the years they've seen the average month that individuals are born in. that month used to be September. It's now December. So we're seeing the tax code affect families' decisions on when they have their children, because believe it or not, a lot of families that are close to their due date will induce at the end of December so they can claim that child as a tax credit for the entire calendar year, because it's not by month, it's by calendar year. So many babies are born.
So for $800 or $900,
for some families, it is worth it. So that's just an example of how our tax code can really impact family decisions.
That's amazing. We have a caller on the line, John from Reston. John, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Did you get your taxes done on time?
Yes, we did.
Okay, you didn't have to get one of those extensions to October 15th that I had to get last year.
No.
So how did you feel about this whole process, John?
I had no problem with it, really. But I had to, you know, I had a bunch of medical bills and stuff, you know, that added up, and it had a lot of deductions and everything. That was good.
Well, it's good, but it's complex, right? It took you a lot of time to do it all.
Yeah, kind of. Well, I mean, not really. I just went to the doctor and asked for a report for the year, you know, and then they just printed it up for me, and then put those numbers in to the TurboTax thing.
Well, so what's your question for Kristina or for me? What do you want to say about taxes?
Well, I was wondering about, like, what's with all the taxes on, like, on your phone bill and stuff? I mean, there's like
that's a great question.
There's like 5 different taxes that they have, or like fees and stuff on the phone. And what's with all that stuff?
That's a great question, and it actually raises a tax that we don't talk about very much. John, thank you for raising that with us. Kristina, how about that? People focus on income taxes, estate taxes, sales taxes, but I know when I get my phone bill or my cell phone bill, it seems like 10% of it is all kinds of wild taxes and fees. Well, what about that?
Well, on average, telecommunications services are taxed at a rate twice of what other consumer products might be taxed at, 10, 12, 14%. And a lot of that is fees. You'll see your Universal Service Fund fee, which is a collection that goes into federal telecommunications programs. You'll often see a 911 fee, a state tax, a federal tax. So your telecommunication services are hit by a variety of fees.
Let's divide that up, because I don't think many Americans would begrudge a 9/11 fee. I think we all
911 emergency.
Right.
Yep.
No, I think most Americans understand we need to be able to dial 911. We want to pay for it in the off chance we might use it. That's not one I begrudge, but we pay an additional state and federal tax that's greater than the normal sales tax.
Combined, the total rate of taxation on telecommunications is often double what you might pay in your state sales tax. And, for example, the Universal Service Fee, which is collected by the federal government, that goes to various FCC programs. And we've argued that some of these programs are wasteful and that they're a waste of the money, and we should just lower the USF fees. For example, USF fees go into one program called the High Cost Fund that way back when there wasn't that much TV and telephone rollout, was used to bring service to rural, underserved areas. Most of these areas have been built out. There's plenty of competitors, whether it's wireless, wireline, yet we're still giving big chunks of money to rural providers that are really could stand on their own 2 feet.
So where does this money go? Does it actually subsidize these corporations?
Absolutely. The providers.
That could otherwise provide the service without it.
And in some cases, these individuals or these corporations give out dividends to their investors that actually higher per person than what they charge an individual consumer that year for service. So they're actually giving out dividends that are more than what they're bringing in. That money's coming from somewhere. It's the U.S. taxpayer. It's
interesting that John raised the question of the telephone fees, because when I was working on Judiciary Committee, we had a person write in. We respond to our constituents about these, and I did some research into them. And I realized that about half of them were not taxes at all. If you look at your phone bills, there's all these things that look like taxes, but actually is what that little provision says taxes and fees. And the taxes really are taxes, but many times telephone companies, they are required to do certain things for the government. So instead of saying, well, the telephone company's charging us or throwing it back to us, they pretend like it's a government fee, when really it's the telephone company charging us.
Well, but certainly many of those fees are government imposed, and we certainly do not begrudge U.S. companies who want to pass on real burdens. I certainly can't speak to your experience, the specific example you were talking about.
My point is that some of these things are real taxes we have to pay, and some of these things are telephone companies that want to pretend like this is something that they're required to pay, when really it's the telephone company passing on a fee. Or sometimes, I remember once I had a bill that they said $20 for unlimited telephone calls, and I joined up, and the bill was something like $40 because this company said there was a $7 fee and this $5 fee, and I actually contacted the FCC, and they said, oh well, the company doesn't have to charge that. But they do. So one thing I would want to caution people about is to find out which of those fees actually are taxes and which are things that the telephone company wants you to think are taxes.
But keep in mind that telecom companies as well have costs that they have to absorb. For example, the average combined state and federal tax. So they may not be charging a 39% state and federal corporate tax rate, but as an organization, they have to absorb those costs if they want to stay afloat.
Well, I'm sure that's true. I would want to compare, though, the United States economy with, say, European economy, because my impression is their corporate tax rates are even higher than ours, and at least right now, the EU is doing much better than the United States. Our dollar's dropping while theirs is going. You're telling me their rates are lower?
The only industrialized country in the world that has a higher corporate tax rate than the United States is Japan. We have a higher corporate tax rate than Germany, than France, and then all of these.
Sweden.
Absolutely. Denmark tax rate in the United States for corporations is over 39%. All these countries, there are.
But we have a lower income tax.
We do have a lower income tax rate. They have much higher levels of government spending, and they make that up through very high personal income tax rates. But a lot of the Eastern European countries, and even places like Ireland, have kind of been experimenting over the past years and instituting one low, flat corporate tax rate. And they've really seen a boom in companies relocating to their areas because for the most part they've educated populations, but with a low simple tax rate that really encourages businesses to relocate within the EU to their member state.
But here's the problem with the American tax rate. Most corporations don't pay it. The statistics I've seen is something like half. You know the numbers more than I do. Maybe you can just tell me what percentage of American corporations don't pay any taxes at all, and what percentage don't pay that 39% rate. I think you'd come out with very few who actually do pay it. Is that right?
I would love to be able to give you a specific number on what average corporations pay, but we do know that the rate is 39%.
That's the rate if you pay your taxes, but there's all kinds of credits and tricks and loopholes.
Absolutely, depending on the industry and depending how good your lobbyists are, wind, solar energy, they all get major tax credits as well. But we also need to keep in mind how much corporations are spending to comply with the tax codes. And the study that we came out with today shows that corporations spend 43% of what they pay in taxes just on figuring out how much they owe. So they're spending over $100 billion just on complying with the tax code.
Or trying to wiggle their way out.
You know what? And I certainly don't blame them. When I filed my taxes, I look for every single exemption or credit I might be able to legally take.
One thing I definitely want to agree with you on is that we need to reduce the complexity of the tax code. And that may mean giving up a lot of corporate welfare. I mean, there were special benefits in the energy bill for Exxon and Mobil. ExxonMobil is the richest corporation in the world. They earn more profits in a quarter than many countries' GDPs. I didn't think they needed a tax break. Would you say that for a simplified tax code, no more corporate welfare?
We absolutely agree with that. We as an organization have actively opposed bailouts, and for example, we have supported efforts to keep a bailout from going to the subprime lenders, for example. They took those risks. Individual corporate investors took those risks. The taxpayers shouldn't have to bail them out when they go belly up.
I hope you felt the same way about Bear Stearns. We'll find out in a second. The other question I want to ask you when we come back is, how do we pay for government? We have government. Someone has to pay for it, or it's going to be a huge debt that you and future generations will have to pay for. Call in, give us your view on taxes this April 15th. You have the number right there, 888-488-MARK. We'll be right back after this.
How far would you go to help someone? Would you go to the end of your driveway? Would you cross a street? Would you cross an ocean? To a place 6,000 miles from home? how long would you go? Would you go for a week? A month? A year? Would you go for 2 years? Would you go if you could use your knowledge to teach someone, and in the process, maybe learn something yourself? Life is calling. How far will you go? Peace Corps.
James, don't forget your helmet.
Will do.
Not that helmet. Your bike helmet.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm James Thrash with the Washington Redskins. On the football field, a helmet is an important piece of equipment. I also wear another helmet that's just as important. A bike helmet. It's the most important piece of equipment you'll have the next time you're out on your bike. Wear yours and make sure your kids do too. Safety first with the Skins.
Monica and her friends want you to know that you should never get near a dog when it is eating, playing with a favorite toy, or sleeping. It's really important to make time for exercise and games and keep your dog's vaccines up to date. Never leave a dog in a small, confined space. This can make dogs aggressive like Monica. If you follow this advice, you and your dog can play safely and happily together.
We are back to the Inside Scoop. Call in live and let your voice be heard. Here again, your host, Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. It's April 15th again. Have you done your taxes? If you're like me, you got out this big box or maybe a manila envelope. I use manila envelopes full of receipts, and you sorted through them and you figured out, okay, this is business and this is personal and this I can declare and this I can't declare. And then, I don't know if you're as wonkish, I guess, as I am about this, but I will go to the IRS tax site and read their publications. And you know, I got an economics degree at Harvard. You'd think I could understand this, but I have to admit, I have trouble with a lot of this stuff. I'm sure many Americans do. And then there's the question of how much taxes to pay. That's maybe even a more difficult question. I think one thing that people on the right and on the left can agree on is that our tax system is too complex. But what about the overall level of government, the level of taxation? My guest is Kristina Rasmussen. She's the Director of Government Affairs for the National Taxpayers Union. Kristina, let me talk about the level of just general government here. If you have a certain amount of government spending, and I know National Taxpayers Union, you want that to be as low as possible. Grover Norquist once said he wanted government so small that he could drown it in a bathtub. I don't know if you would concur with that assessment. But you clearly want spending to be low. All right, and we can get to that. But if you have a certain amount of spending, isn't it better to pay the taxes to match that, in other words, have a balanced budget, than to have lesser taxes, which leads to a huge debt and interest on the tax bill to follow?
Well, absolutely. We recognize that it costs quite a bit of money to pay the interest on our national debt. And every year we vote alert in our national rating against raising the limit. But then again, people who would like to portray it as just so simple as raising taxes enough to cover their spending, they're always going to try to increase the spending. So what we would rather do is say, this is our tax income, let's spend what we can afford, rather than say, this is how much we want to spend, we'll just bring in whatever we can.
But either way, you would agree that a debt along with the interest, that's not good for the taxpayer, because it just means you pay more taxes later, really for the same amount. I mean, you pay the $100 million or $100 billion that you had to spend plus an additional interest.
Oh, I completely agree with you on issues of national debt. One report from the government came out and said that for every man, woman, and child in this country, we faced a national debt burden of over $130,000. That is significant, and it will have to be paid at some point. But in the short time, we could cut back our spending, and that's how we would prefer to get to that balance.
Now, the National Taxpayers Union normally supports more Republican members of Congress on these issues, on tax issues, than Democratic members, though there are exceptions.
Although I'm going to interrupt you right there. We are a nonpartisan organization. We work with Democrats and Republicans on a wide variety of issues. For us, it's not important the partisan R&D underneath your name. It's what the ideas you believe in.
But is it fair to say that the Republican Congress, when they were in control from 01 to 06 under George Bush, they were spending beyond their means. I mean, the Iraq War alone, the minimum cost I've seen is $600 billion. The real cost, when I take into account all the health care for all the veterans for years to come, the expenses and pensions and everything, it's been calculated by a Harvard professor as high as $3 trillion. Now, I would think that if you want to cut spending, that would be one of the first places you want to cut.
I will be the first person to admit that spending really has gone up under the Bush administration. On average, outlays underneath President Bush have gone up 7% each year. That's a significant amount of money.
And it's higher than under Bill Clinton.
Absolutely. Non-defense, discretionary spending. So no defense, discretionary spending, this isn't mandatory entitlements, has gone up faster underneath President Bush than President Clinton's. We're talking about health spending, education, and so forth. And that's really of a concern to a conservative, fiscally responsible group like us. But then again, he also reduced taxes. Now, we would have preferred an ideal world for him to have kept spending limited and allow for a tax cut at the same time.
So it's interesting. Apart from the Iraq War, already the Bush administration is spending faster than the Clinton administration. You add this extremely enormous cost of an Iraq War. Shouldn't the National Taxpayers Union be out there marching with the peace activists, not for any view on Saddam Hussein, but simply on the fact that this war is too expensive for the American taxpayer?
You know, we've actually commented on perceived issues of waste, corruption going abroad, and we have asked every single year that President Bush include his funding requests for the war on budget. Let's have an honest debate where everything's included in his official budget request. Unfortunately, we've seen way too much emergency spending come through that's been off budget. That's a supplemental that's not taken into account in the big pictures. We'd rather have an honest accounting where everything is in front of you, and that is something that we have supported.
So is it fair to say that the National Taxpayers Union believes that if you support the Iraq War, you should pay more taxes to pay for it?
If you support the Iraq War, the government does take checks, and if you feel like you're not paying enough towards our national burden, although you cannot earmark your funds, let's say you want to send more money into the government to pay for the war, you can't say send it to this, but they will put it in a general treasury fund of which the money will come out of.
But I just want to make sure the position is clear. You believe that if you support, listen, many Americans are opposed now to the Iraq War. Less were opposed at the beginning. Now we have 63% are opposed. Maybe some 20 or 30% still support the war. It's NTU's position that if you support the war, you should be willing to pay more taxes to pay for it.
The people who do support the war and want to keep taxes low would probably argue that they have funding priorities, and that they would rather see their tax dollars go to the Iraqi war. But they're not allowed to say, oh, but I'm going to cut out the rest of these programs, and I don't want my money going to these other areas that I don't support. Unfortunately, every individual doesn't get to check a little box saying what department they want to go to. So I can imagine that people who do support the war, want to see the funding for it, would ask that
Social
Congress
Security be ended or something like
cut
that.
in other areas.
But it would have to be something major like ending Social Security, because if you take away Social Security and Medicare and these entitlement programs that are already in the budget, and you were trying to find the cost of the Iraq War and the rest of the discretionary funds, there's just not enough money there to do it.
You're absolutely right that the discretionary funds, while they're a significant chunk of the federal budget, our entitlement spending does take up a lot of money as well. So if you could have across the board cuts from all programs, you could also look at ending certain programs.
Well, here's I guess my problem with either NTU or conservatives in general is that they say, okay, we were glad we had the Bush tax cuts, and we wish spending weren't so high. But it seems to me that it almost never comes about to make them equal, to have them a budget that's, I mean, whether you look at Ronald Reagan, what did he do? Raise spending, cut taxes. Then you have Bill Clinton, raise taxes and actually cut spending. So there was more cutting of spending, and then you have George Bush cutting taxes, raising spending. It seems to me that under Republicans, what do you get? You get a lot of debt. And so is it responsible to call for a tax cut when we don't have the spending cuts to match?
Well, I think you'll probably find disappointed partisans on both sides of the table. Democrats who argue for more spending and limited taxes because they don't want to go on the record in favor of taxes. You'll probably find disappointed ideologues on both sides of the table.
Let me ask specifically about where the tax money goes. Okay, the Bush tax cuts, I read one study that says that if you make more than $1 million a year, you saved more than $100,000 a year. And if you make some $50,000 a year, you got the $300 at the outset, and that was about it. Maybe I don't know, $500 or $1,000, definitely less than $1,000. People who, while it's no doubt true that when you look at only income taxes, The super rich pay a lot of income taxes compared to the others. But when you look at things like Social Security taxes, for example, or even sales taxes, but particularly Social Security taxes, they are regressive. In other words, if you make $80,000 or less, you pay a full 7.5% of your income into Social Security taxes. If you make $10 million, you pay 0.01%. Do you support saying, for example, on Social Security taxes, that at least everyone should pay the same rate?
But then again, if you ask people to pay a Social Security payroll tax on their entire income, you need to give them benefits that are based on that entire income, which means more outlays in the future.
Why?
Well, do you think it's fair your entire life that you pay taxes on all of your income, yet you receive benefits that are based on a portion of that? I think that's something that a lot of people are uncomfortable with. But going back to what you were saying about federal income taxes and who really pays them, when it comes to federal income taxes, the top 50%, basically, if you make more than $31,000, you are paying for 97% of all of the federal income tax collections. So I think we hear this argument that
if you make more than $31,000.
$31,000, you are technically in the top half, the top 50% of adjusted gross income, and the top 50% pay for 97% of all the tax collections from federal income taxes. But you know, even if you're in the top 1%, if you're the richest of the rich, you are paying 40% of the federal income tax collections. So I think it's extremely progressive, and it's something that definitely we should extend the tax cuts from 2001 and 2003. Everyone got a tax cut. The brackets were lowered for everybody. Right now we have brackets of 10, 15, 25, 28, 33, and 35% for your federal income taxes. Everybody got a tax rate. In 2011, if these tax cuts expire, everyone will go into a higher tax bracket.
Now, you said that 1% pay 40%. What is the wealth of 1% of the nation? The top 1%. I would suspect it's well over 50%.
If you have an adjusted gross income of above $364,000, you are technically in the top 1% of income earners.
Yeah. Now, what is their wealth? What is the total wealth of the entire nation owned by that 1%? Do you have those figures?
You know, that's a good question. I wish I could give you that number. Do you have it for me right now?
I think I do.
Okay.
I haven't done the research, but I've done it in the past. And as I recall, it's over 50%. And here's, I guess, my point. If 1% of the nation has half the nation's wealth, well, there's no wonder why they're paying 40% of the nation's taxes. You have that wealth to spend. You know, if you told me that 50%...
Exactly. You should be able to spend it how you see fit. Reinvesting in new jobs. Maybe you're an owner of a small business. Expand the job. Give more people a career. Should you send it to a government bureaucrat who spends it on who knows what? Maybe this Iraqi war you don't like. There's more funds available for it.
We don't have much time before the break. But when we come back, I'm going to explain to you why I believe that poor and middle-class Americans are the engines of the economy, not the super wealthy. And if you give a tax cut to those in the middle or those in the lower middle, you actually achieve more economic benefit. I'll give you my analogy, and you can tell me where you think I'm wrong. Folks, you can tell me that as well. Feel free to call in and join the conversation. It's easy to do. The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK. 888-488-6275. You can also comment on the blog. All you have to do is go to the website, radioinsidescoop.com, click on today's show, tell me your comments, and we will read them right here on the air. We'll be right back with more Tax Day, preparing your taxes with Kristina Rasmussen right after this.
Go to jail for a gun crime, and your family serves a sentence with you.
I'm Bob Costas, and I've been broadcasting sports for a long time. Much of what I do is ad-libbed, but still, one of the most important aspects of my job is being able to write. Narrations, essays, commentaries. It's essential to express those thoughts and concepts clearly and concisely. Good writing is essential for almost any career. And with today's advanced technology, the National Commission on Writing reports that the need to write well has never been more important. Writing is everybody's business.
Sure, my neighbors Jean and Louise, they may be superheroes with superpowers, but that doesn't make them so super at saving energy and money.
Honey?
I may not be able to harness the power of the elements, but I save significant cash and help the environment with appliances, electronics, and windows featuring the Energy Star label. So discover your own energy-saving superpowers. Go to ase.org/consumers.
Mom, Dad's making fondue again.
We are back to the Inside Scoop. Call in live and let your voice be heard. Here again, your host, Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I would like you to call in and let your voice be heard. What do you think? Are you busy filling out your taxes right now as we speak, struggling? Are you one of those people, as I have been on a couple of years, I have to admit, who has lined up at the post office with all those other recreants who's getting in at the last minute? What do you think about tax day? What do you think is fair to pay taxes on, and what is it unfair? Who should pay, who should bear the burden of the nation's taxes? Toll-free number 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. I'm talking with Kristina Rasmussen. She is the Director of Government Affairs at the National Taxpayers Union, and she was making an argument in support of the Bush tax cuts. Here's my counter-argument. It's really very simple, and I've brought it up before. Let's say you have a very rich factory owner. He owns a car factory. And that car factory churns out cars. And he's a multimillionaire, and we can give him $10 million. Is he going to build another car factory? I don't think so, because he doesn't need any more cars. He's already got 6 cars and 2 yachts and 1 small Latin American island. He doesn't really have a place to put that $10 million. He'll put it in the bank, it'll earn interest, or maybe he'll put it in the stock market. Let's take that same $10 million, and instead, we'll give $10,000 apiece to 1,000 middle-income or lower middle-income families. What will they do with that money? They might want to buy a car. After all, they're struggling. They have 2 jobs in this household, but they have to share a car. So this way they can buy a new car, and each of them can drive on their own. When they buy that new car, then the factory owner, who wouldn't respond to the $10 million, then he'll build a new factory because of all that demand. He'll hire more people. There'll be a multiplier effect. His workers will then buy more cars. Lower and middle income people, they are the engines of the economy, not the super rich. How do you respond?
I think we just heard 1940s liberal Keynesian economic explanation.
What's wrong with my metaphor?
I think you are really discounting the entrepreneurial drive of American small business owners and large and medium-sized business owners as well. And you really kind of disregard the interest in economic growth and expansion that I think so many Americans have. My husband is a small business owner. He just started this past year, and it's been a bumpy road, but I can tell you that if you gave him a $10 million, or at least let him keep more of what he works hard to own, he's looking to hire a new employee. But they've held off until this point because they're concerned that they cannot afford to pay the payroll taxes and all the other taxes that they need to pay to cover this employee's salary. Employee's salary is $40,000. And that's what the employee thinks they're getting. But don't forget that the employer has to pay significant payroll income taxes on it, FICA and so forth. So my husband would love to expand his business and give people good jobs.
How can he expand his business if he doesn't have the demand? Isn't demand the engine of the economy, not supply? Why would he hire an employee if he didn't have the business?
I think there will always be a demand for good jobs and potential for economic growth.
Right, but it's based on demand. Whatever your husband's business is, it's demand for his product or his services. When that grows, that's when he needs to hire the employee, not just cash that comes into his pocket.
That demand is coming from other businesses who all of a sudden have more of their own money that they've worked hard to keep and the government hasn't taken away from them. That demand has been freed up by lower taxes and gives them more resources to buy my husband's product.
But here's the thing. We talked about the top 1% paying 40% of the taxes, of income taxes, I should be clear to specify, because we haven't included Social Security and sales taxes, and when you do that, the level goes down. But the top 1%, let me suggest to you, doesn't need much more. They've already got the TVs and the TiVos.
Who are you to
and the
tell them what
cars.
to do with
No,
their life?
they have
Should you
plenty
not
of
have
millions
this
of
laptop?
dollars.
I mean, most Africans,
I'm
Asians
talking
do not have a
about
laptop.
middle income.
This is
I
about
support
personal
middle-income
economic
people.
freedom. You should be able to do with the money that you've worked hard for what you want with it. If you want to give it to charity, great. If you want to write out a check to the Treasury to fund your favorite government programs, great. That is your personal choice. It is really the height of arrogance to be telling other individuals what they should do with their own hard work.
If the goal of American tax policy is to make the economy run, then we should make sure that middle and lower income people have enough money to spend. You know, I disagree with many things that Ford said when he built. He was a nasty guy in many ways, but the one thing he got right when he built his Model T factory is he said, I have to pay my workers enough so that they can afford my cars. If you have economies, as we have some Latin American economies, where you have a few super rich and everyone else is super poor, those economies don't work very well. And with increasing income inequality in America, what do we have? We have a lessening economy. If we make sure that the middle class, and by the way, I don't consider small businessmen way up there in that 1%. I think your husband is definitely an engine of the economy. I'm talking about the guy that owns a car factory. I'm talking about the super rich, the ones who get the most out of the Bush tax cuts. Isn't there a limit? Let me see if I can get this concession out of you. I probably can't. Isn't there a limit where if you earn $10 million a year, that if you earn $20 million a year, you're just not going to spend that extra $10 million. You can't spend an extra $10 million unless you have ice statues that have vodka coming out of various orifices, as I guess Duke Cunningham had. You just can't spend that amount of money.
But going back to what you said as the government, I'm going to dodge the question, I fully admit it. Going back to what you said about government should make the economy run. That's really the core principle here. I think we've seen plenty of examples of government intervention messing things up more, and I think the housing industry is one of that. And the latest idea out of Washington has been a $7,000 tax credit for anybody who buys a foreclosed home. This is a government policy intervening, trying to fix the market. Well, what's going to happen? More people are going to take out loans that they probably can't afford to get that $7 tax credit on a house that they're buying. So in the end, we're only exacerbating the problem. So if I can go back to answer your question, I don't think the government is smart enough to possibly work out all the iterations that personal individual choice can take when it's unfettered and free. So I don't think that the government shouldn't be involved with these decisions.
Let me hear what a caller has to say. I still argue middle class, the engines of the economy. Let's hear from what Debbie from Annandale has to say. Debbie, who's right, Kristina or me, or do you disagree with both of us?
Sorry, like you, Mark, like your show, but I have to disagree with both of you.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm 51. I've been disabled for over 10 years. My disability for the year net, what I see, is $12,000. Try living in Fairfax County on $12,000 when you have extreme health problems. I still have to pay taxes. I did used to volunteer when I could for Meals on Wheels. I can't even do that anymore.
So what are you saying? I mean, I feel for your situation. Are you saying that that your disability payment should be more?
I'd love to be middle class. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
No, I'm just trying. What you're saying, I think, and I don't put words in your mouth, so if I am, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I think what you're saying is that when you have tax cuts structured to the super rich, instead of for people like you have trouble just getting by, just living day to day and having health care and being a productive American citizen when you have people making hundreds of millions of dollars getting more money when you could use some of it yourself. But
I don't have anything against the rich. I mean, or the middle class. I'm just saying there are a lot of people that don't fit either one. And I know a lot of people who work really hard, work 3 jobs just to barely make it. And unfortunately, I can't work any job. And it's impossible to live on $12,000 a year, and it's almost impossible. practically impossible to get health care as well.
Well, let me ask this question to Kristina. I mean, there are people that are struggling, that are working 2-3 jobs. One of the things that, I forget who the CEO was, I think it was Warren Buffett, who pointed out that his secretary pays a higher rate than he does. I mean, Debbie's struggling just to make it to get by, and Bush is lavishing all this money on people that don't really need it.
Well, Warren Buffett plays with his taxes and gives quite a bit of money to foundations and charity, and that certainly does bring his effective tax rate down. But from Debbie's example of a $12,000 income, it sounds like you will be qualifying for the tax rebate that will start to go out in May. You have to have at least $3,000 in qualifying income, and it sounds like you hit that level. So you will be seeing some extra financial help come in the mail, or if you have direct deposit into your bank account electronically, and that should help with some of your household day-to-day costs.
I just think most of the concern is that, you know, you say you don't want the government getting involved in all this, but at the end of the day, it's almost like a capitalism versus socialism issue. And I am not a socialist pure, and I am not a capitalist pure either. I believe in some mixture. You probably do too, though we disagree on the proper mixture of it. But when I think of pure capitalism, I have to think back to Upton Sinclair's novel The Jungle 100 years ago, where you have, you know, the big factory owner and workers were so much like supplies, and you know, if you cut their hands off or anything like that, that's just part of the job, and they could completely mistreat people. Isn't there a role for government in protecting a minimum level, a minimum standard, so that we have disabled people can get health care, people who through no fault of their own can't work, can survive? Or are you arguing that we should have sort of an Ayn Rand society where, you know, Sparta, the survival of the fittest, and if you can't make it and you have leukemia, you just die? I mean, isn't there a minimum level that society should provide for its people?
I think this is very easily compared to something like the minimum wage debate. And people argue that, oh, we should have a living wage, everyone should get a minimum of $40,000, for example. Well, I think all that does is encourage unemployment, for one, because all of a sudden someone whose the market value, the worth of their labor is under $40,000 can't get hired all of a sudden, and all of a sudden things like daily expenses start costing more. And you may think of Upton Sinclair, but I think of something like the Toyota Prius on our streets right now. That was not made through a government program, although the United States government did offer a cash reward for an American company who could come up with a fuel-efficient car, and it was the Japanese who did it.
People get a tax credit with the Prius.
That's right, but it was the Japanese, through seeing the market potential for selling a car that people wanted because it was low emissions, low gas usage. That's a perfect example of what capitalism can do to promote a better living standard.
And I don't believe in pure socialism, and I believe in capitalism, and I love the Prius. But go back to my question of a disabled person, and I don't necessarily want to pick on Debbie. I don't know all the examples of her situation, but you have a person who has worked hard, who's trying to do her best. She becomes disabled through no fault of her own. Let's say she has leukemia. So she's disabled, and she needs health care, and she can't work, and she needs to survive unless you're heartless enough to say, sorry, you have to die, so society moves on. Isn't there a minimum standard that a government should make sure in the richest country on earth that people should have?
And I think we both agree on the outcomes here. I want everyone in the United States, as I assume you do, to be happy and healthy and prosperous. But I think we just disagree on how we get there. For example,
how do we get there for my hypothetical person?
One of the market solutions that we've seen become more popular over the years is health savings account. This is tax-free money that you can use for health expenses. And I just had some eye surgery done.
You have to be healthy to use those things.
No, you don't, because you, for example, I'll get very personal here. I had a prescription, and because it was paid for a copay under a traditional legacy healthcare system, I didn't really know how much it cost. And only when I switched to an HSA and I had to pay some of those costs out of pocket did I call up CVS and ask them, what is the retail price for this drug? And it was $600. They had a generic alternative that I could opt in for $15. So really putting the consumer in charge of some of their healthcare spending dollars, all of a sudden it's my money in my health savings account. I care a lot more about where it goes.
I have no problem with that. I also think the pharmaceutical companies, when they know the insurance companies are paying for it, they jack up the rates because they can get a lot of money from them. But go back to my basic question. Is there a minimum level of sustenance that we as a society, as the American society we are, owe just so people survive? So a homeless person under a bridge doesn't die somewhere. Isn't that, again, you can look at it as religious, you can look at it as humane. isn't there some minimum level, we can disagree on what the minimum level is, that a society should provide for its most unfortunate citizens?
You know, if you want to set that level and define it, you are more than welcome to join with individual like-minded persons to fund this out of your personal account. I don't want to tell you what to do with your money, and I assume you don't want to tell everyone out in the rest of the world what they should do with their individual finances, because they might have costs or expenses that you just don't know about.
We'll get on to more of this, absolutely. If you want to call in, please join us. 888-488-MARK. We'll be right back after this.
One day, I forgot to throw away my trash after lunch, but then I saw it later when I was playing in the woods. The next week, I went boating with my grandpa, and there it was. I tried to go swimming, but I couldn't because of my trash. And when I went fishing, well, you can guess what I caught that day. So now I always throw away my trash in the garbage can, where it belongs.
1 in 8 Americans goes hungry. One idea helped change that. A community started a garden that blossomed into farmers markets. 1 in 6 children lives in poverty. One group of women found an answer by opening a daycare center that their neighbors could afford. Today, 36 million Americans live in poverty. But one by one, people are helping themselves and each other to change the picture of poverty to one of hope. For easy ways you can help, visit povertyusa.org.
Every year, 250,000 Americans are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease.
My fellow scientists and I are working on treatments and a cure for this deadly disease.
Millions of lives are at stake. Alzheimer's disease affects 1 in 3 families.
We're committed to uncovering the mystery of Alzheimer's.
And we're not going to quit until the job is done.
To find out more about Alzheimer's disease, call 1-800-437-2423.
Only through research will a cure be found.
James, don't forget your helmet.
Will do.
Not a helmet. Your bike helmet.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm James Thrash with the Washington Redskins. On the football field, a helmet is an important piece of equipment. I also wear another helmet that's just as important. A bike helmet. It's the most important piece of equipment you'll have the next time you're out on your bike. Wear yours and make sure your kids do too. Safety first with the Skins.
We are back to the Inside Scoop. Call in live and let your voice be heard. Here again, your host, Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. Just a few minutes left. If you want to call in, you better hurry up. 888-488-MARK, or you can post on the website at radioinsidescoop.com. We're talking about taxes. It's April 15th. My guest is Kristina Rasmussen. She's the Director of Government Affairs for the National Taxpayers Union. And I've been struggling, pushing to get her to agree that some minimum level of sustenance should be there for American citizens. Now, Kristina looks like a very friendly person, a very nice person, but I can't get her to make that concession. You're not going to, are you?
How about you tell me what that level of sustenance is? You tell me what every single person deserves rather than should earn.
Okay, I think no American should go to bed hungry. I think
wait a second. Should they go to bed with their preferred food?
No. No.
Why not? So you're saying that as long as you have a full stomach,
as long as you have enough to eat,
that's as best as you get.
That's the minimum. I said minimum level.
Okay.
I don't promise. So I said enough food to live, basic health care. Okay? Which means if you have leukemia, you should be treated even if you're 5 years old and your parents are poor. It means that no elective surgery. But basic
and what if
minimum
the trade-off
levels to survive,
for that health care cost from the government is your parents being able to keep 20% of what they bring home?
You know,
what if they have to pay 80%
I will agree with you.
taxes?
Some medical procedures are too expensive. If it requires a heart transplant or a heart, lung, and kidneys transplant that costs millions and millions of dollars, there can be a limit even to life-saving stuff. But actually, I like the Oregon plan, where you rate each medical procedure based on its cost effectiveness to, for example, penicillin treating syphilis, the cost is very, very small and the damage is very, very great. So clearly that's one we should use, whereas a heart, lung, and kidney transplant on a 102-year-old woman, clearly the cost is much higher than the benefit. So you rank it. But basic life-saving benefits, health care, enough food to eat, shelter. Now, I'm not saying your own home, but shelter so that you don't have to sleep under a bridge. You have a place to sleep where there's shelter over your head. and a basic education so that you have an opportunity to escape your situation. These are very minimal levels. Can I get you to agree to those?
Well, let me address education, the last one you said there. Because I, too, want educated. I want my children to be smart. I want my children's friends to have a good education as well. The city that I live in right now, Alexandria, Virginia, spends $30,000 per child per year, yet it has the highest dropout rate in the Washington, D.C. area. And what I think that example really shows you is that you can spend a lot of money on these programs and you don't necessarily get the results
I agree. There's
you don't
all kinds of
necessarily
wasteful spending.
get
I'm just
smart
trying to argue
children.
that there should be some minimum standard. That's
And
all
once
I'm
again,
arguing. And then we can argue over how high to take it.
What and how you get there. I've always argued, if I were a 10th grader, again, in Alexandria, and someone said, I'll give you $10,000 if you can pass these tests and demonstrate this knowledge at the end of the year. Go off for a year and I'll come back and see you. I think I would ace those tests because I've got a market incentive all of a sudden to read my books and do my homework.
We can put more money into National Merit Scholarships. I remember them.
It's an alternative system.
You get $1,000.
Right now, it's not working.
Well, there are such scholarships. It's only $1,000. Maybe you think it should be more.
But then going back to the food security you were talking about, because right now we're debating a farm bill in Congress.
Okay, I'm against agricultural subsidies.
Making sure that everyone has enough food to eat. Would you accept that if that required environmentally harmful subsidies that encourage, say, sugar production in southern Florida in the Everglades? You need to keep these trade-offs in mind.
I don't think it's that much to ask that no American citizen go hungry, because I think we're not that far from that. I don't think more than 10% of our citizens go hungry. So I don't think it requires that much extra effort. I don't think it requires environmental degradation just to have enough food to make sure in the richest country on earth that people eat. I want to get to other questions, though, because we have a lot more to talk about. You've been rating members of Congress here in the National Taxpayers Union. I know you want to talk about this, and it's only fair I give you that opportunity. You have a ranking that is very large. You have 400-something House bills and 100-something Senate bills. Can you give me a summary in just a few?
Well, real briefly, for the last 29 years, NTU has been coming out with a rating of every single member of Congress. A lot of groups do this. It's nothing new. Ours is different in that we look at every single bill that has anything to do with spending, taxes, regulation, trade, or our national debt. And based on all of these votes, and it was over 600 total in both the House and the Senate, we come up with a rating for each member of Congress. And you can view these ratings how your member did at ntu.org. And if you do believe in a limited government and low taxes and less spending, these grades really are indicative of how your member is representing or not representing you.
But I'm not sure we should believe it on that. Let me ask you about the question of regulation. Because my guess is the National Taxpayers Union, if someone were to ask you, hey, Kristina Rasmussen, what's NTU's position on regulation, you would say we want less of it. Is that fair to say, generally?
Absolutely.
Okay, but regulation often protects us. I mean, we have Chinese toys in the free market that are full of lead that can kill babies. We have subprime mortgages that shouldn't have been made because banks weren't regulated. We have all kinds of negative, harmful things that happen where maybe a little regulation is actually better economically, pure cost-benefit analysis than suffering dead children or a huge subprime loan crisis. Isn't some regulation good and necessary?
I think in a free and open society that has access to this information and a healthy media to distribute warnings and so forth, I would wager you $10 that more mothers heard about potential lead from individual kits that they could buy, and that media stories that were put in magazines like Good Housekeeping and so forth. I think they did more to spread the concerns about that than the one regulator at the government bureaucracy that oversees those tests did. So I think that if you have a free media where you can afford to buy a kit to test your kids' toys for lead and learn about this concern, that can do more for individuals to take these toys out of their kids' hands than one government bureaucratic person issuing regulations that go into the Federal Register and very few people read.
At the beginning of this show, you were complaining, as I was, that every April 15th, the taxpayer spends 24 hours going through all these forms. If we don't have one bureaucrat in the government regulating these kinds of things, you would have parents, they'd have to buy lead kits, they'd have to buy radon kits, they'd have to check out and make sure that they don't have Enron all their money invested in their company. You would, in fact, make everyone spend so much time on looking at the details of healthcare plans that they couldn't live their lives and go to work and raise their children. Can't government simplify some of these
I think it can give a false sense of security. There's a bill bill right now that would put all these regulations in place, and people will think that it's safe until they find the next thing. So yes, there are concerns out there, and we encourage people to be informed consumers. Consumer Reports is a great magazine. This is an individual organization doing ratings of the effectiveness and safety of products. It's not a government bureaucracy. I would rather turn to Consumer Reports, who has a market interest in making sure they give me factual, accurate information, than I would ever rely on a government bureaucrat.
So you wouldn't have government protect the safety of water, protect the safety of drugs? I mean, are you willing to go that far?
I would be comfortable with a system that allows me as an informed consumer, as long as I have access to certain types of information and outlets who want to give me that information, perhaps in exchange for a fee. That's something I'm comfortable with.
How do you know it's accurate? I mean, you have a corporation, they want to sell you their drugs. They're going to argue it does all kinds of things. Here we have an FDA, a neutral organization that tells us this drug doesn't work. This drug does work.
When people go to buy a car, one of the top sources of information for how safe that car is actually comes from the insurance industry. They have their own think tank that pays tons of money to test all of these cars for their safety ratings, because these insurance companies have a market interest in making sure that their insurance people who buy their products buy safe cars.
They also have a market interest in selling you things you don't want. Every insurance company I ever have, when I have car insurance, they want to sell me rental insurance, whereas the chance of me having an accident and having rental a car might cost me $50 for a year, and they're going to charge me $15 a year
Exactly,
for it.
But it's a choice. You can back off. Where if the government says you must do this, you don't have a choice.
But what the government can do is can regulate that, and because, for example, we had this huge subprime crisis. I don't think you're going to disagree with me that a lot of the bad economic times we're suffering right now is due to the subprime crisis. And now where you may disagree with me is that I believe that was caused by a withdrawal of the traditional regulation for banks that had been done in the past. That if we had kept those regulations in place, banks wouldn't have made these stupid loans, even though they thought it was economically in their best interest, because they would bundle it up and send it elsewhere. Those kinds of regulations on companies like Enron would protect consumers. I'll give you one more example, then you'll respond, and that is the energy crisis in California in 2001. A manipulated crisis by free marketeers messing up prices. Again, we need more government regulation.
You have to remember that government regulations come at a cost. New Jersey, for example, has a very heavily regulated insurance market. They mandate that via regulations that insurance programs cover this, 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 and this, and this. Lots of stuff. As a result, buying insurance in New Jersey is very expensive, and an individual would have to pay 3-4 times what they might pay in another state that has fewer regulations. So what you've done all of a sudden is made an important product like health insurance become less affordable because you regulated it to death. So you need to keep in mind that just because, oh, let's reform this and regulate that, is not the end-all be-all, because there's a cost to that.
I agree there's a cost. I agree there can be over-regulation. There can also be under-regulation. Before we close, I've got to go to the website because I promised listeners we would go there. And this is a quote from Louisville Anon. He's talking about Scientology is run like a business, yet it is tax exempt. They make up to $365,000, blah, blah, blah. They don't pay a dime of taxes on it. What about the exemption for religion or even for cults like the Church of Scientology? What's NTU's position on that?
Well, our Congress has made a decision that nonprofit organizations for educational or religious purposes are not taxable.
What's NTU's position on that?
I honestly don't know that we've taken a position on that, but it's an interesting subject. I think one that is deserving of more attention. I don't know how unbiased any nonprofit can be, though, because NTU as a nonprofit would prefer to allow people who want to donate to our foundation for that to be tax deductible. But I know that Grassley on the Senate side is looking into hearings on this issue, and I think it's one that is deserving of more discussion.
And I think as our guest, as our caller points out, our viewer, that we have to be careful about things that are more business rather than religion. The time went very quickly. If you haven't done your taxes, what are you waiting for? Turn off the TV, go finish your taxes, and we can have this discussion later. If you have further comment on tonight's show, go to the website, radioinsidescoop.com. Let me know what you think. Kristina Rasmussen,
thank you so much.
Appreciate
it.